go ahead and get started here. So again, thank you everybody for joining. And we first off want to thank Steve and Jack Entertainment for joining us. What we're going to talk about today is, F&O or BC. We have a lot of customers that we've been doing assessments off of any of the on-prem ERPs from Dynamics, whether that's SL, GP, NAV, AX, and there's a decision to make on which is better. And there's a lot of customers in that gray area and don't quite understand F&O or BC. So we're going to talk through a lot of different things here. A couple of housekeeping issues. We do ask that you interact. You can interrupt us, so just either chime in, say, hold on, I have a question, do the raise hand, or you can message Nada, who's on here directly, and she'll take any of those questions and interrupt us or save them for the appropriate section to ask those questions. The recording will be made available after the session as well. So for anybody that's not joining from your organization or you feel might benefit from this, we'll pass that recording along, and you're more than welcome to reference that later. So today's agenda, we're going to go through some introductions. We have several of us here representing our F&O and BC team, as well as Jack Entertainment and Steve. And what we're going to start is just brief introductions, and then we're going to talk about Jack Entertainment and their journey and kind of where they went and they landed. And then we're going to dive into F&O or BC and things to consider. And we've broken it down by section. So finance, production, warehousing. So we'll kind of go through those. And again, it'll be some great dialogue and interaction. And then at the end, we'll talk about the decision process. Let's go ahead and start with introductions. I'd like to start. We'll go around the horn here. And we'll start with our guest of honor, Steve. Steve, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yesterday, and Dr. I think it's Kim Yerrick.
I think somebody's.
There we go.
There we go. All right, so Steve, guest of honor. We'll let you start first there.
I don't know about guest of honor, but nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Steve Zappacosta. I am the VP of Purchasing and Food and Beverage for Jack Entertainment. We are a casino company in Northeast Ohio with a couple of properties there. And I got the privilege the last 2 years of leading the charge on migrating our ERP from Dynamics to AX to D365 BC.
Save the juice. Save the juice.
We'll save the juice. We'll save the juice. All right.
Save the juice. We want everybody to hear the story. I'll go next, and we'll go around the horn here. Kyle McNerney, been with enVista 4.5 years. Been in the Microsoft space for about 13 years, working with everything from SL, GP, NAV, AX to now F&O and Business Central. James, I'll let you go next.
Hello, everybody. My name is James Cox. I'm a senior pre-sales solution architect. Been with enVista for almost 10 years now, and my expertise is really in the distribution and operations areas of the system.
And our guru for BC, Victor.
Hi, everybody. My name is Victor Dirksen. Been working on Dynamics Nav or Business Central now for a little over 20 years. Recently joined enVista to help grow the BC practice, and looking forward to hopefully getting to know some of you guys better after this webinar.
Thanks, Victor. And Nigel, unfortunately, is on a plane. He will not be joining us, but James is going to take the privilege of handling that section when we get there. Gene, last but not least.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gene Feichner. I've been with enVista almost 10 years, and I've been in the ERP space almost 10 years as well. I'm a former Microsoft employee, former controller, and active CPA, and I'll be handling the finance section.
All right, great. So again, for those that have joined late, please feel free to interrupt us as we go, or send Nada questions directly or directly in the chat. We'll address them as we go. So real quick about enVista, we've been around since 2002, privately held company. In 2008, we started our Microsoft practice around Dynamics AX. And since then, we've grown from AX, and now we're doing F&O. We're doing Business Central, NAV, GP. And overall, our Microsoft practice, we are considered a managed partner for Microsoft. Meaning we're one of the 29, 30 Microsoft partners out there that are managed by Microsoft for business applications. So when you think about business applications, all their different applications out there, we also do Azure as well as Office and Microsoft 365. So we bring a lot of experience to the table with over 750 years combined between the team. We have several of those people joining us today that they can speak very, very in depth about Business Central or F&O and which direction to go. So with that, let's start with Steve and talk about Jack Entertainment. And Steve, I'll go ahead and have you start. Who is Jack Entertainment, and what do you guys do as a company? You might be. I think you're muted, Steve.
I hate it when that happens.
You're gonna get a few of those during this session.
So Jack Entertainment, we're a casino company in Northeast Ohio, and we've got quite a bit of history. And primarily, we focus on Jack Cleveland Casino and Jack Thistledown Racino.
Okay. And so, Steve, give us a little bit of background, because it is a unique story, and I'm not going to say that it's unique in all these assessments, but a lot of companies that were on AX didn't make the choice to go to Business Central. So why don't you give us a little bit about the background, when you guys started with AX, what version you were on, and then going through that assessment process, and really what were you guys thinking as you look to go from on-prem Dynamics to the cloud-based, either BC or F&O?
Fair enough. So we started. So anyway, if for those who aren't familiar with what casino companies kind of have depth and breadth, if you're a casino company, you pretty much buy almost every kind of product and every kind of service except for hotel. I mean, so there's gaming, there's facilities, there's EVS, there's food and beverage, there's retail. It's a pretty comprehensive type of business. So we needed an ERP that could handle all of that. And originally, when we first were created back in 2015, we were on Dynamics AX. And you know what? I should have looked this up. And I think I said I was going to look this up. I don't remember which version of Dynamics AX we were on. But, I would describe AX as it's a skyscraper. And when a developer builds a skyscraper, they don't build out the details. They don't build out every single floor. They lease out the floors, and they give people a gray box space. And here's where you connect the electricity and the plumbing, and here's where the elevators and stairways are. And you build out what you need. And AX was a lot like that. It could do anything. You pretty much had to build most of it out yourself. There was a lobby, there was a rooftop restaurant, and everything in between you had to develop. And so when we made the decision to migrate away from AX, mostly because it was end of life, I'm not going to lie, very few people voluntarily choose to change their ERP. And this is
what do you mean? ERPs are fun to implement.
Oh yeah, this was my fourth. So anyway, the first thing we did was a needs assessment, and we included all aspects of our industry with it. I probably had over 120 people participate in these workshops. We asked 3 questions. What do you like about the current system? What do you not like about it? And if there were no obstacles, what would be on your wish list? And we wrote it all down. We had a steering committee put together of representatives from each element of our business. It wasn't just finance, there was operations and warehouse, HR, and every department essentially was represented in this group. And we created our core list of needs, which was basically most of what we had from AX. And then we had 2 wish list columns, and the priority, high priority and low priority, and it really depended on funding, how much we were going to implement. I would encourage anybody to do that, because I think what you're going to find is in all the ERPs that you review, you're going to find a lot of stuff on your wish list is native functionality to them, and you basically get it for free. Or
Yeah.
almost for free. And we then looked at that needs assessment. We went out to about a half a dozen different vendors for implementation to give recommendations on which ERP we should pick and why. And after kind of seeing the options, we originally landed on D365 F&O. And almost at the 11th hour, we did another look at it and realized that D365 Business Central actually met our core needs much better without having a bunch of functionality that we would never use. It was going to be infinitely scalable. If we bought some more properties, it wouldn't be a problem. If we added a hotel, that wouldn't be a problem. Essentially, we don't do any manufacturing. There's no raw ingredients coming in one side and finished product going out the other. And that was how I would describe the biggest difference as we saw it between Business Central and F&O. So part of, and then we realized how much less expensive it was to implement and license Business Central. So we got a lot more of our wish list as a result of that decision.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit, Steve, about the assessment piece that you did between F&O and BC? And I'll talk to everybody after that about Microsoft funding options that you have out there, but kind of the assessment and why'd you guys go down that path? And how do we work together with you to determine BC is the best fit?
Yeah, and actually, enVista was very helpful in this because, like I said, it was a little bit of an 11th hour change of direction. So basically, all the proposals and everything else they had put together, we asked them to do it again, and with this other application. And like I said, the biggest reason was we realized there was a substantial portion of F&O's functionality that, as a casino, as a gaming company, as a hospitality company, we would never take advantage of. And there was substantial savings. There were a couple of gaps in that assessment, and enVista was very helpful. So I would say to anyone, there's money to be had from Microsoft for deep dive.
There it is.
I know that's what you wanted me to say, right?
Well, hey, it's true, right? Hey, if we could get Microsoft to pay for anything, let's do it, right?
Yeah, that it gives folks like enVista the ability to come in and not just take your needs assessment, do a deep dive in your existing system, look at the data structure, look at the functionality you have, and really come up with a much more refined plan and approach. And I would certainly say that was a very good decision on our part to go down that road. It paid dividends further in the process. So I think it's where you wanted me to go with this conversation.
Yeah, and just for everybody's awareness, and whether you work with enVista or your current Microsoft partner, it's called an SMA or Standard Migration Assessment. So Microsoft has funds available that you can apply for with your partner, such as enVista or whoever else you're working with, to get funds to look at moving from your on-prem Dynamics ERP, whether that's SL, GP, NAV, AX, to an F&O or BC. Now, you do have to be current on your software assurance, so your yearly software assurance that you're paying for your on-prem. If you're current on that, you are eligible, but definitely take advantage of that and explore that because it was able to give, I think, what was it, Steve, like $15,000 we got from Microsoft?
It was.
Yeah, so with $15,000, we can go a lot deeper than just a 1 or 2 hour conversation and then assessing. We can actually talk to finance. We can talk to whether you have a warehousing, production. I know that's not applicable here to Jack, but we could talk to those different people with our SMEs and then start putting that assessment together. So, please, I implore you, Microsoft makes those funds available. Everybody pays some hefty licensing fees, including enVista. We drink our own Kool-Aid. So take advantage of those. And overall, it was about 4 to 6 elapsed weeks. And again, those elapsed weeks are really from the time you start and you start working with their finance team and then maybe their purchasing team and you go on and then creating the documentation and propose, bring back that deliverable on the different options and approaches and things like that. We'll get to a little bit of that later on what that output looks like. So, Steve, as far as what you implemented with Business Central, talk a little bit about, we call them modules, but the areas of Business Central that you decided to implement moving from AX.
Absolutely. So even though there is some functionality either we haven't taken advantage of or don't plan to take advantage of, our first approach was at least like functionality to what we had before. And so we didn't, you can see on this list, we didn't integrate with our point of sale system. We've got a fairly decent, call it a manual journal entry process, but it's very minimal, and left that in place. Order management is certainly something that we will implement in the future. Inventory forecasting and planning is already a topic of conversation. Accounts receivable, definitely implemented. Accounts payable was huge, and really have to thank enVista. We had a lot of very specific requirements when it came to accounts payable, and they were able to find a couple or one external application in particular that helped us manage that really well. There's a lot of bolt-on options you can have in the ecosystem of 365. The GL, like any business, you live and die by it. And warehouse management. So we do have warehouses in each property. So we did need a certain level of warehouse management. But looking at the options, it was actually the most basic. They call it basic warehousing. That the easiest functionality within BC was the one that actually fit our needs the best.
Okay, great. Yeah, but we'll have Steve chime in a little bit more as we go through some of the different areas here. And so as we go through these areas, again, chime in with questions, or if you want to bring up your specific scenarios and we have time to discuss them, again, please bring them up. So a couple things before we get into the areas is what to consider. One of the things you want to look at, and with these assessments that we've done with F&O or BC, is not where the business is now, but where are they going in 5, 7, 10 years? Are they going to go multinational, adding on new product lines? Are they in acquisition mode? A lot of these things can come into play, because even though the system that you're thinking of might be a fit now, what happens in 5 years? And as we joked about earlier, ERPs are not fun to put in. I don't care what anybody says, but they give everybody a little bit of heartache, because it's a lot of not only money, but time for the internal team that they have to invest and to ensure to get them right. And you look at what Gartner says, like 65, 70% of ERP implementations fail to meet expectations, okay? The other thing I want to note is CE, or what Microsoft calls customer engagement. So that's D365 sales, field service, customer service marketing, as well as Office 365, or now M365, your Outlook and PowerPoint, Excel. They work both with BC and F&O, and that's part of the beauty of the Microsoft platform. Okay. The other thing is ISVs. Steve, you had just mentioned an ISV for AP that we found to help out with your AP piece. If you guys go to AppSource, Microsoft AppSource, there's a ton of ISVs out there in IP that bolt on to F&O and BC, and most of them reside within the application. So keep that in mind. If there's little gaps you have to fill, AppSource is a great place to go, and then also Power Apps. So last point, on paper, both F&O and BC seem to have the same modules. They have WMS, they have production, they have finance. How do you delineate between what's right for you and what do you actually need? And that's where in enVista, we've done a lot of these different assessments, and some have gone F&O, some have gone BC. So we'll talk more in depth about any of those. So the intangibles. Victor, we'll start with you on user adoption here. I think this is, one of the things I think is key here on user adoption is people say in Business Central, it's 1 or 2 clicks to typically do anything. It can be 4 to 5 in F&O. We could debunk that or not, but Victor, I'll let you talk a little bit about the user adoption from the Business Central standpoint.
Yeah, sure. So, Business Central was, it was previously called Dynamics Nav, and when Microsoft moved it into the cloud, they really redesigned the UI to make it very easy to use, give it a real kind of web interface, if you would. And so even though it still has all the great functionality that it had before as Dynamics Nav, it's even easier to use now than it used to be. Business Central is a great solution. Of course, it doesn't have the same level of functionality as an F&O, but within that limited functionality, that also creates a certain level of simplicity to the processes, the business processes, right? You don't always have as many tables to fill out. You don't have as many fields to fill out. Plus, Microsoft has been very rigorous over the years of making sure that similar types of transactions have the same layout. Right. So, for example, the sales order screen and the purchase order screen are so almost identical that sometimes people will be in one and think they're in the other. What that does is, for a small business where you have employees wearing a lot of hats, those employees can jump around from one role to the other and be able to get retrained or cross-trained across different business functions very easily, right? Which is not always the case with a larger, more sophisticated solution. So.
Yep. Yeah, and I would say from an F&O standpoint, any of the F&O folks can chime in. User adoption for F&O, we find that organizational change management, or OCM, is something that needs to be injected into the process for F&O. It does take more of your internal users to be power users and learn the product, right? It is a standard UI, look and feel to the other Microsoft products out there, but because it's a little bit more rich in functionality, it could be a little bit more of a user adoption push than you might need with Business Central, is what we've seen. I don't know if anybody else on the F&O side want to speak to that at all.
Well, I think one thing to mention, Kyle, is what they did on the F&O side to try to combat, or to try to make that easier, is they have the concept of task recorder, which allows the users to train based upon their processes and standard processes of the business, and it will show the users where to click and where to go through for all their different processes that they're doing. So if you need to do a sales order, the concept of task recorder will give the user an SOP on how to create a sales order. So it's one thing that Microsoft has done to try to combat the robustness and the learning curve of F&O.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, if you have users and folks that are leaving the organization, everybody's got turnover, the task recordings are available for those new people to step in and follow the process, correct?
Yep.
All right, the next piece. So Azure spend, this comes up a lot. I know, especially on the F&O side. We were recently talking to a customer that, they were surprised at this. It does need to be tightly managed on the F&O side, and the variable Azure spend can get up there. Now, what enVista does is we put a budget plan together, and then we track it month by month, and then send it to the customers. Here's where you're tracking, here's where you're going, right? Victor, what about on the BC side with your variable Azure spend?
Yeah, that doesn't really come into play. So, Business Central is designed for small companies. Most of the clients that I've worked with over time did not have an IT group or anyone who could really, manage or maintain that system on a regular basis. So, with Business Central is specifically designed to have very low maintenance requirements, right? So, the user licenses that you pay for include everything on the back end. So, storage, server, network infrastructure. Once you've signed up and have started paying those license fees, you can log into a browser and access the system. You never have to worry about any back-end maintenance at all. So it's very easy to maintain long-term.
I think that plays into the licensing piece. With F&O, which is different than Dynamics AX, you need a 20 user minimum, and those are full licenses at $180 per user per month. PUPM, Microsoft acronyms. And Steve, maybe you could chime in here. Was that a factor for you at all in your decision on the licensing costs between F&O and BC?
It was. As with so many companies, there's not a whole lot of extra people around with, just waiting for something big to do or something to go wrong. So you got to have something that is gonna work and not take a huge amount of support. And that plus the pricing certainly had a huge impact.
Sure. Yep. And with BC, Victor, you have a 3 user minimum. I know I always see 1 user minimum. Why do you say 3?
Oh, that's stipulated by Microsoft.
Okay, so they
Yep.
have changed that. So let's demystify that then.
Okay. Yeah, 3 user
Alright.
minimum. It's pretty unusual to have somebody with just 3 users though, but it is a much smaller minimum than what you see with an F&O. So if you have a smaller team, especially if you're just an accounting implementation, it can definitely fit with your requirements for your budget.
Yep. And one thing, advice-wise, for anybody, whether you go F&O or BC, the team member license is more than read-only. So if you want to see more on that, just ping us afterwards. We'll send you a quick little slide that we have on all the things team member licenses can do that are beyond just read-only. The other thing I would say is always license lower on the lower level. Have your users come back to you and ask to be licensed up, because they're never going to tell you they're over licensed because they just don't know it. Okay. If we look at the implementation and time costs, I use the dollar signs here that you'll see on like Open Table. You know, look, they can be up there. Implementation wise, it's typically much longer with F&O. You know, when I put 6 months there, that's really for like D365 finance only, right? Now, can you do a technical upgrade from AX to F&O in 6 months? Absolutely. You know, from a one-to-one with minimal customizations and things like that. Victor, you want to talk real quickly about the implementation, you know, time and cost from a BC standpoint and kind of what those guardrails look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do occasionally get a smaller accounting only implementation that can take 2 months. Usually it's more like 3 months, and for those kind of implementations, you're typically looking to $40,000 to $60,000, right? So pretty cheap. If you're, you know, manufacturer or have multiple manufacturing and distribution sites, yeah, it could take up to 10 months or more. But even then, you know, a really big BC implementation with multiple manufacturing locations, you're looking at maybe $500,000 to $600,000. So that's just the high end, low end, and high end. You know, costs. You know, most BC implementations range between $200,000 to $300,000 if you're a distributor or distributor manufacturer. Now, there's a lot of things that play into that. But that just give you an idea. I did want to also point out, Kyle, I don't think you mentioned it, was the device license. I want to mention for people who have a lot of people out, you know, like if you're a warehouse distributor or a manufacturing company where you have, say, a couple hundred employees out in the warehouse or production floor, you do not have to buy a license for each one of those. The concept of the device license is you can get a lot of the data capture from your warehouse scanning or your production consumption and output on a physical device like a tablet. And then you only have to pay the license for that device. You don't have to buy a license for each individual user, and that can save you thousands and thousands of dollars of licensing. So don't let the essentials of premium licensing scare you off if you have a large user count in your production facility.
Yep. Yeah. And we'll get a little bit on warehousing with the, you know, your scanners and wearables and things like that. So, because I want to get deeper into some of the sections here. From a team size standpoint, we typically see a much larger implementation team size required from the customer. You know, we typically ask for about 50 to 80% of their time, and that's for a successful implementation in F&O because it's their system at the end of the day. And so we want the customer to be highly involved there. You know, from a implementation team side on BC, you know, Victor, comment briefly about that.
Yeah, it's typically a lot smaller, and generally we're actually working with people who have day jobs, right? So you don't see on the Business Central side actual dedicated project teams. It's very common to actually be working with the controller, the AP manager, or the operations manager, or something like that. Now, you know, with enVista, we like to offer various different implementation estimates, right? So, you know, if you do have a really small team, you guys are running really lean, and your staff is already, you know, working 45 to 50 hours a week, you know, we can build it into our estimate to take on some of the implementation workload for your team, because you're not going to have somebody dedicated who can really focus on, say, data extraction and cleanup of your master records, you know, customers, vendors, items, and such like that. So that's the service that we provide to help make sure you guys are successful, because that's something we encounter quite a bit.
Yeah. And Steve, how many people did you have internally on your BC project?
Internally, we were definitely in that latter category. It was a couple of people who already had 2 or 3 day jobs. So essentially, there was a core group of 4 people. And you know, one thing I would, you know, just chime in. And by the way, Kyle, if this is the wrong time to say it, sorry.
Go for
one
it.
one thing I learned through this implementation was when you get the user acceptance testing, that is, you can have enVista or your partner do all of the heavy lifting. They did all of the data migration, and we migrated all of our data. Every scrap of it came over going back to 2015. We've got about a dozen different legal entities, and there was some specific functionality we wanted. But when you get that user acceptance testing sheet, that is a place where you really want to invest the time, break it down, send the different testing to the different users who would, be an AP or purchasing or, PR requesters or warehouse, finance, etc. Have them go through it. I will tell you, we made a mistake there. We did not do it as diligently as we should have. But many thanks. We recognized that before we went live, and we had additional support at go live for 3 weeks. So we had 3 bodies here from enVista, and that worked out well too. So I would even say even if you're looking at it and saying I don't have 80 to 100 hours, which is about what it's going to take to go through that. Yeah, there's a way there's a way to mitigate that as well, and just expect a couple of bumps in the road the first week or two, and we made it through all right.
Yeah. And can you segue there, and Stephen, to the ongoing support with BC, since you've been live since August, right? Talk a little bit about the support and how you're handling that.
Yeah. So internally, there's about 3 of us who have a fairly decent knowledge of the system, and I'd say 95% of the support tickets that come from our team, we're able to answer in a couple of minutes. They're, a little bit of user training or user error. We haven't actually had enough technical support required to actually engage in a full support contract. We've just been time and material. And, it has not been a very costly endeavor at all. Once we were up and running and got the bulk of the configuration done, it's pretty, I don't want to say it's on autopilot, because I don't think there's a large enough piece of wood for me to knock on to say that, but it's been pretty low maintenance.
Yeah, and that's what I see with a lot of my BC clients. Typically, support is data entry. So a user made a mistake, gets an error, they don't quite know how to interpret it. This system's been around for 30 years. Microsoft has invested a lot of money in stabilizing the code. The last time I actually had an actual software bug that I had to research was 5 years ago, right? So if you think about the fact that I've implemented 50 clients, and that's how rare an actual bug is, I mean, that tells you something about how stable the solution is. Now, the one thing we do have, and I'm going to want to talk to Steve about this at some point, is we do have some managed services plans, because we do have a lot of clients who exist in highly regulated industries, and where the managed services plans can come into play is we can help take on some of that workload of regression testing new versions when Microsoft rolls those out. So we're going to talk about that some more later, so I don't want to get into too much of that. But that's typically where we get into managed services in the area of Business Central.
Yeah, and just on the F&O side with support, and we see this a lot. We do a lot of takeovers or rescues, if you will. And we see a lot on the F&O side. The customers aren't ready for life after go live and how to operationalize the system. D365, F&O, as well as BC being evergreen applications, you take updates, you don't upgrade, right? And Microsoft, has rules on that, on how many you can skip and when you have to take them and things like that. And the more customized, more integrations you have, ISVs on F&O, that can be a very laborious process, right? And it can be costly, depending on if you're using a partner or, with internal resources. So one of the things I would say from a support standpoint, bake that into the implementation and do what we call a production readiness workshop to understand, what's life going to look like after go live? How do we operationalize it? Who's doing what on our side, right? And don't underestimate what it's going to take, because there's also opportunities to take new functionality along that maybe you've been thinking about and waiting for Microsoft to come out with. Okay. I'm not going to go too much into the technology stack here. As we mentioned, they leverage all the Microsoft other applications out there. App Source is great for both sides. They both run on Microsoft Cloud, Microsoft Azure, which if you look at the R&D spend that Microsoft's putting in, to Azure compared to other clouds, it's pretty significant. Okay, I'm going to move on here since we don't have as much time to get through all the other ones. Scaling, real quick. I want to talk about scaling because we get asked this a lot about how do we scale these solutions as we get more data, we acquire companies and things like that. So Victor, I'll start with you on scaling in BC and how is that done as the customer grows, adds more data, more users, whatnot.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy and it's kind of automatically managed in the background. So as you add more user licenses, Microsoft will add more storage space and more processing power. Now it does get to a certain limit. We're going to talk about that in a couple other slides. The architecture is designed to be simpler and easier and lower cost, but that also means that it has some limitations as to the number of transactions you can handle on an ongoing basis or at any given time. But as far as like scaling goes, if you think you're going to you have like a $50 million company and you have like maybe 20 users and you think you're going to quadruple in size in the next 5 years. That can totally be managed by Business Central, and Microsoft will give you additional resources as you add those users up to that size.
Perfect. And from scaling on F&O, I don't know, Gene or James, you guys want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as you're going through your implementation of finance and operations, one of the things that you'll actually do is review with Microsoft, what would be the max peak of orders you would be processing in a given time period. And then Microsoft will build the environment around those kind of requirements. And as you're actually growing as a company, you needing, a larger environment or more horsepower per se, you can actually scale those up, so you can even go all the way up to a tier 5 environment, which, supports customers that have, 3,000 plus users.
Yep. And keep in mind the spend there though, right? There's additional spend for that as you scale up. Okay. Finance, Victor, Gene, I'll let you guys chime in here on some of the key financial pieces to keep in mind here when looking at F&O or BC.
Yeah, so I think one of the first things that you need to look at is the financial operations of the company. And one thing that both F&O and BC can handle is they both handle multiple currencies and multiple languages. And so they're very similar in that regard. But I think one thing that you need to consider is if you have really complex financial operations across many different countries, and sometimes some of those countries can have some nuances in their reporting requirements or tax, how they look at tax or different things for tariffs and shipping. So for example, like F&O, there's a little bit more robust functionality for handling different charts of accounts, for centralized management of your different charts of accounts of those legal entities than maybe there might be in BC. And there's also some intercompany differences, which we'll talk about in a second. Victor, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to that on the BC side.
No, I was just going to echo that, and we've been talking a lot about Jack Entertainment, who went from AX to Business Central, but I've seen it go the other way as well, where I've worked with companies that were on Dynamics Nav, for example, and they were looking at an upgrade to BC, but when we got into some of the requirements, in this case, and specifically finance, we find the company had a lot of different subsidiaries and very complex consolidation requirements with like hierarchies within their consolidations, right? And they, the client was struggling to do all that on Excel spreadsheets. That's what we hear a lot, right? Microsoft Excel is the most commonly used ERP system around the world, right? But when we got into some of those details, I said, wow, you know what? Business Central just was not designed to handle this level of financial complexity. Let's take a look at F&O. And ultimately, those couple of those clients did end up going to F&O, and we're very happy with that decision.
Yep. And I would say as well, if you look at financial reporting, I think both have great financial reporting. They both leverage Power BI, right? As well as their own financial reporting tools inside. So I think they're very comparable there. All right, moving on. I'll let you guys talk quickly about the chart of accounts and financial dimensions here, and really what do you look at and why? Maybe would you go with one or the other?
Yeah, so I think on this one, both systems have unlimited financial dimensions, and what a financial dimension is really how you report on your business and the different departments or cost centers that you have, and both of the systems have unlimited number of dimensions. And you just need to look at how you want to use those. Do you want to share those dimensions across your legal entities? And if you have a lot of legal entities that you need to share dimensions on, that might be something for F&O, but both systems can use, restrictions or requirements for different postings. So for example, if you want to have a department requirement for when you post payroll expense, you can use that in either system. So both of them have robust financial dimension capabilities there.
I don't really have anything in particular to add. I think that was a great summary, and yeah, both systems are comparable, but of course F&O has a lot more.
Yeah, and then I think the last section, go ahead, Kyle.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the last section we have there for charts of accounts and financial consolidations. Both systems support consolidations, and they both have a very robust process for consolidating entities like subsidiary entities. And F&O has two options. You can do a soft consolidation, where you consolidate just through financial reporting and you don't need an extra legal entity, or you can do a hard consolidation where you have a separate legal entity for the sole purpose of consolidating those transactions. But then for BC, they also have that same robust kind of capability for consolidating. And one thing that I think is great with BC is you can pull in other non-Microsoft ERP systems into the consolidation process. So for example, if you make some kind of acquisition and that company is not on BC, you can easily import the trial balance and build that into your consolidation process.
Yeah, very true. Thank you for pointing that out.
Look at that, crossing the line there, James, going over to the other side. I like it. All right, warehousing. James, I'll let you start on the warehousing piece with inbound and outbound.
Sure, no problem. So about 8 years ago, when Microsoft was still using AX 2012 as its flagship ERP system, Microsoft actually purchased a warehousing solution from another partner and then released that to the public in R3. And so over the last 8 years, Microsoft has invested a considerable amount of time, energy, and effort into building out what is now really a tier 1 competitive WMS system that's integrated in the ERP solution. And so if you're on a system today, maybe it's something like an older version of Scale, a High Jump, Red Prairie, things like that, or if you have tier 1 WMS requirements and you're kind of evaluating systems, F&O is probably going to be a good fit. Just a few examples of some of the things that we have in terms of functionality is if your vendors are sending you license plate details with an advanced shipment notice, or an ASN, or it could be called an 856. That's something that's supported in the system where we can get that license plate detail, receive those goods at the time of receipt, and then put everything away. Same thing would be true for integrated quality management. So if you have scenarios where you actually need to do quality tests or kind of ad hoc quality tests where maybe you just realize visually you need to inspect this and then have it directed through the system in that manner, that's all built out. And then on the outbound side, there is advanced load planning, so you can build out loads for full truckload orders or LTL orders, and you can even manage all of your different dock locations to make sure multiple orders aren't going to the same. And then same thing on the outbound for picking. You can actually support LIFO, FIFO, and FIFO-based picking strategies, where we're trying to find the oldest license plates, the newest license plates, or the oldest batches and get those to your customers. And go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, thanks. So I was going to mention this is one of those areas where you really see either ISV or third-party solutions come into play with Business Central, because you look at that list of functionality in F&O, and it's a great list. Like sometimes I feel kind of jealous. I'd love to have some of that functionality in BC, but I've done over 50 implementations with NAV or BC clients, and it's been pretty rare that I've seen a client need a lot of those functions, right? If you're like $100 or $150 million revenue company, you probably don't need a lot of that stuff. If you're $1 billion company with like 10 facilities, like $10 million square foot facilities, yeah, you're going to need that, right? So the idea with Business Central is Microsoft actually provides the source code. And we've discussed this before with these ISVs, which are independent software vendors, where people like enVista can access the source code and build a solution to add these functions sort of as a little add-on, right? So, if you need one element or two elements from that F&O list, but you don't need everything else. You don't want to pay for all that functionality that you don't need, right? So you can go with the smaller scale, a cheaper solution with Business Central, but then augment that functionality with one or two of these ISVs that kind of capture some of that functionality that you need. If you need all of it, it's going to be a lot more secure and a lot cheaper in the long run to actually go with F&O. But if you don't, we can tailor fit a solution with the options available in the marketplace to meet your needs and your budget.
Yeah, and I will say the warehousing piece comes up quite often, and it can be a very fun debate internally, which is a healthy debate, right? Because we're having it on the customer's behalf on what do they actually need with warehousing, but this warehousing comes up quite often. And we'll move on here with inventory control and some of the miscellaneous WMS features that you guys had highlighted here. So James, I'll let you start, and then Victor, you can add color from the BC side.
Yeah, no problem. And so these kind of just add on to kind of those tier one WMS requirements that you may, have today or may, envision that you're going to need in the future. So if you want to be able to cycle count your whole warehouse based on different type of counting policies like ABC, different date ranges, things like that, that would be supported in our solution. And then across the warehouse, if you have different kind of replenishment rules or you need slotting logic to make recommendations where you're going to move your kind of fast moving materials, that's all built into the platform. And it's something that you can configure, either for your initial implementation or add on at a later phase with no extra cost for licensing or anything like that.
Yep. I don't think I have anything in particular to add on top of that, so I'll just let us move on because I know we're getting a little behind here, so go ahead.
All right, you're good. All right, let's move on to the supply chain piece. And talk a little bit about the production side of things. So, Victor, I'll let you start here on the BC side with supply chain production and what you see in BC as kind of the strong points and some of the things to think about.
Yeah, sure. So we actually have pretty robust functionality when it comes to manufacturing and production orders, but there are some pretty key differences. For example, I think in the forecasting side, we do not have a forecast tool built in. Business Central can hold a forecast and can do MRP based on that, but it cannot generate a forecast. Now, again, that's where we rely on an ISV solution. And I think if you look through a lot of this, we have pretty robust functionality, but there's for the typical SMB client, right? It's somebody in the $200 million to $200 million or $20 million to $200 million revenue range. It's probably going to be a great fit. But if you get up to like $1 billion revenue company, you're probably going to need to look for something in the F&O kind of enterprise level solution, because you probably are going to need a lot of this additional functionality.
Yeah, and then on the F&O side, you do have an integrated demand planning solution. So it does have a handful of different algorithms where it can kind of generate, what that forecast will be. And you can accept it or modify it before publishing it to the system. And then also what's new and actually really interesting is the DDMRP that's actually going to be released very soon from Microsoft. So that's demand-driven MRP, where you can actually set up the system to have different types of inventory positions and buffer profiles and things like that, where the system will actually recommend, safety stock levels and kind of also minimize the amount of noise that you see whenever you're going through your planning activities. And then across the system, it supports discrete and process manufacturing, as well as actually lean manufacturing too, even though we don't have that listed here. And so, pretty much if you're a manufacturer, you're going to find, that the F&O solution can handle a lot of your business requirements.
When's the DDMRP being released, by Microsoft?
So I think in the current version right now, it's still in preview mode. So if you're on .31, it's still in preview, but I believe it's supposed to be released in .33 as an actual public feature.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. And then on here, we actually just did a F&O or BC assessment with the customer, and one of the things that came up was they run lean manufacturing and Kanbans, and BC doesn't handle that out of the box, so they went, they decided to go F&O, right? So there's things there that sometimes you'll find that you do certain things that just one adds and the other doesn't. But the other piece too, and Victor, you brought up a good point on 20 million to 200 million. I think they say the rule of thumb is 150 million in revenue and above is F&O, 150 million and below is BC. I would say that's it's a rule of thumb, but it doesn't fit everybody. We've had customers 40, 50 to 80 million go F&O. We've had 500 million, 600 million go BC, right? And Victor, I think you've probably seen the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Even though that revenue, they say that, you know, it's published out there, you can Google it, but I don't always see that that's just a hard, fast rule.
No, you're absolutely right. You really need to look at the needs of the business, right? So to your point, I actually, about 10 years ago, I had a client that was about $80 million manufacturer. And, you know, they needed forecasting, they needed a configurator, they needed a TMS, they need, you know, now we could have supplemented Business Central with all of those, but those would have been separate ISVs. And when you put it all together, the overall implementation and licensing ended up being the same as F&O. So as an $80 million company, I said, you know what, you should really go with F&O because it's all built in. You just have one license. It's all designed and built from the scratch. On the other side, I actually had a client 15 years ago that had $1.5 billion in revenue, and they were a great fit. They ended up being a great fit for Business Central, and they saved a lot of money on licensing and implementation costs and still got everything they needed.
Yep. Very, very true. All right, so let me talk just briefly about some of the assessment outputs, just so everybody can kind of see, you know, these are examples of some of these assessment outputs that we've done, you know, where when we go through, we're going to look at the platform and look at your company and the things you're going to do. And we'll come out with these different comparisons. And, you know, again, we'll go deeper into this with, you know, the impact of the business, the ROI, you know, what to expect in the future, right? But these are just an example of some of the different outputs that we've done, right, for different customers. You know, and again, you know, look at transportation management. That's a great example where, you know, TMS is within F&O. I wouldn't say it's the best, right? You know, the BC really doesn't have it be more, you know, an ISV there. So, you know, depending on some of these needs, you might need an ISV in either or solution, right? But just something to keep in mind here on the way that we look at things when we go through these assessments with our customers, okay? And you'll see here, you know, here they rank side by side. So if all things being equal, you're probably going to go BC just from a cost standpoint, right? And also from a user adoption standpoint, if, you know, obviously there's more to your list than 4 things, but, you know, when you start stacking them together and what you really need, where do they rank and what's the impact to your business, not just current state, but future state.
Hey, Kyle, this is Tyler from the team. During these assessments, do we also uncover things like Power BI if there's a need, or if there's something for customer engagement, meaning CE, right, from a sales standpoint? Are there areas of the business that we cover or uncover that for the client as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, reporting is going to be involved in all these. And if you look at NAV and AX and even GP, many years ago, they all were ISVs, right? Whether it was Jet Reports or a Target, you know, Halo, Zap, you name it, right? While like Steve's running Jet Reports at Jack Entertainment, they're implementing that now. You know, Jet's native with Business Central. So we'll definitely look at the reporting piece, because a lot of times the reporting side was an ISV that we can get rid of with potentially out of the box. But, you know, we also will look at that from, hey, what's also comes out of the box where Business Central Jet is part of the Jet Analytics is part of BC, what's deployed there. Customer engagement, absolutely. We'll also look at that. You know, both applications, F&O and BC, have some level of sales in there, some I call it light CRM, but other companies might have a Zoho, or they might have Salesforce, right? So yeah, we'll definitely look at like all sides of the coin there. Victor, anything you want to add on there around reporting or CE?
No, I think you covered that very well.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, just some other examples here on going through now. We also see a lot of these other WMSs and things out there that we might integrate to, or, you know, do we move it to, right, the either Business Central warehousing or F&O warehousing. Okay. So I think, Nada, we're getting to the end here. is there any questions for the group that we'd like to, bring up to the team before we hop off here in a couple minutes?
Yep, so got a couple of them. So the first one is for WMS. Do both F&O and BC support RF devices? And if so, what is the operating system?
Yeah, on the-
Victor, James, I think you guys, go ahead.
I was gonna say, on the F&O side, yeah, on the F&O side, there is an integrated mobile app that you can actually install on your devices. It currently supports Windows and Android operating systems. I don't know the exact version that's required right now, but we can certainly get you that info. But there also is plans in the near future to support iOS devices too, so like iPads and things like that.
Do you know when that's coming out?
That one I don't know off the top of my head. I can look that one up as well.
Okay.
You guys talked about ISVs quite a bit, so I'm hoping that you guys will be able to expand on this one. In terms of ISVs, which ones are typically deployed between F&O and BC?
That's a good one. Let's start, Victor, with you. How many ISVs do you see on average one deployed?
Right.
I know you're laughing right now. It's a loaded question.
It is a very loaded question, and you do see a lot of it. But if you were to hold a gun to my head and say, "What do you typically see?" I would say, well, I think the quote typical BC client unquote probably has between 3 to 5 ISVs, right? And the most common ones that I see are like a warehouse scanning. So like we were just talking about, that's a warehouse scanning solution is included with F&O. It's not included with Business Central, but we actually have 3 ISV partners that we work with very closely here at enVista. Each one has a different mix of budget and functionality built into it. So that's part of our implementation methodology, is to help to understand your needs and figure out which of those solutions would be the better fit, right? Just to give you an idea. So that is the nice thing, is we do have multiple options available for any of those gaps. So warehouse scanning is usually typical one. AR automation, with OCR for inbound purchase orders to post purchase, the purchase orders automatically. AR automation for customer payments through a customer portal is a very, very common one. And then there's a bunch of other ones that I see that are less common. Sales tax integration is very common. Some of those.
Right. Yeah, I'd say from the F&O side, AX, there was a lot more ISVs. I remember back in the day being at a Microsoft conference, they called AX Frankenstein because you had so many ISVs that you needed. Steve, I see you laughing. It's true. Since they've gone to F&O, a lot of those ISVs, a lot of IPs been procured by Microsoft, put in the product, but I would say we see a lot of AP automation still. SK Global, we see a lot of Gene, I think you could chime in on that, like treasury automation is a big one.
Yeah, Treasury, SK Global is probably the biggest ISV that we see in the F&O space, followed probably then by sales tax. So like your Alvalera, your Vertex, or your CCH Walters Core. But one thing to note is on the AP automation side, Microsoft's actually bought some IP and they're releasing it on their April release is the plan. And it's going to be a full AP automation suite within F&O. So something to think about if you're looking at that kind of ISV.
Okay. And I think now that we have some questions in the general chat as well, I don't know if those are answered.
Nope. Well, one of them was, but we do have a question, and I hope I don't butcher. There's pre-encumbrance and encumbrance in BC.
That's a very specific question. I don't know if I can answer that inside of this presentation. So whoever asked that, if you'd like, feel free to send me an email and we can explore that in more detail.
All right. Well, I know we're at time here. Steve, first of all, thank you, sir. We really appreciate it. Happy to have a great customer like yourself join us for this. And for everybody else that took the time to join us, we hope this was valuable. Again, we'll send the recordings out there to you as well as the PowerPoint. We also need to especially thank Nada for putting this together. We thank you, Nada, for all your hard work and making this look pretty because, we can't do that. So And for the rest of the enVista team that helped out, thank you guys very much. Appreciate your time and your knowledge, of course, on these subjects.